Okay, my name is Peilu Zhang. I'm a postdoc at Cornell. And first of all, thanks for organizing such wonderful session. And I wish I could have been there in person, especially when I see a lot of familiar faces there. So this is the paper joined with Yingjunjie Zhang and Dr. Marco Palma. And this paper is probably different from the other three talks in the session. We studied the effects of social roles on competitiveness.
Sorry, Pelu, we just see a black screen.
Okay. Probably I need to access to the full screen. How about now?
Yeah, now it
okay.
works.
So this paper studied the effects of social roles on competitiveness, especially the gender gap in competitiveness in general. And so the gender gap in competitiveness or competition entry has been very well documented in economics literature since the Nieder and the Western 2000 QJE paper. It has been a big topic and has been replicated so many times. Females shy away from competition compared to males, even they have similar ability. And economists are interested in seeing whether this gender gap can explain some gender inequality in the labor market. And people try to see where this gender gap comes from. Like they find males are more confident than females, and females are more risk averse than males because entering competition most time is riskier behavior. And women are more out-regarding than males. However, after they control all these factors, the gender gap in competition entry still exists. And research also try to close this gender gap because when female, they're select out from certain competitive fields that is costly for the society. And in general, there were two approaches the past research has tried to close the gender gap. One approach is to assume the preference competition are malleable. Like there's a paper, they found gender gap in competition entry versus in a matrilinear society compared to patriarchal society. And they find girls in single-sex schools are more likely to enter competitions than girls from mixed-sex schools. And another approach is to take the gender gap in competitiveness as given and to implement some institutional changes, like change the gender composition of competitions. There were papers they find when there are more females in the competition, the gender gap in competition entry reduces. Or change the competitors or competition beneficiaries. There's a very interesting paper. They find when the beneficiaries are children, females are more likely to enter competition. Or develop a specific sponsorship program for competition entry for females. So in this paper, we use the first approach and to evaluate how social roles affect individual preference for competition entry. Specifically, we're interested in seeing whether one of the reasons why women shy away from competition is that they subject to their gender roles and competitiveness might violate the social norms of competitiveness associated with their gender roles. So this is from the social identity concepts, which was introduced by Aklov 2000 from social psychology. They define identity as a sense of belonging to a social category, including views of how people within that category should behave. One of the most application is gender. So females and males belong to different category, and they have different prescribed behavior by the society. They have different expectation from the society. So, and why the social identity or the social roles can influence economic outcomes, because deviating from those socially prescribed behavior generates a social cost. To be honest, when I read the literature, sometimes I feel very sad, because I see that job promotions increase the likelihood of divorce for women, but not for men. Social identity costs make single female students demonstrate less ambition in the presence of single males. And this is a field experiment conducted with MBA students at Harvard University. So for this specific topic, competitiveness, men's social identity promoted, while women's social identity penalized competitiveness. So our experiment design is based on this general concept. In our experiment design, we try to randomly assign different roles or titles to each gender. And by doing this, we assign each individual a different social norm of competitiveness than the socially prescribed gender norm for competitiveness. And the randomly assigned title or roles are breadwinner, supporter, and to get more implications in the workplace, we also try the manager and assistant. I will describe this our treatment in detail in a minute. So we conduct a between subject design with. Any question?
Yes. Okay. I think a speaker, Glendale needs to mute her iPhone. I don't think we have a question.
Okay, I will keep going. So we conducted a between subject design with a baseline and treatment groups. We actually conduct 2 runs. One is a laboratory experiment, which was conducted in 2018. And in that run, we only have baseline and the breadwinner and the supporter treatment. And in total, we collected 205 subjects. And we conduct another online experiment in 2022 based on the some comments of our reviewers, and we increase our sample size, and also we include all the treatment, breadwinner and the supporter treatment, and manager and assistant treatment. In total, we have 508 observations for the online experiment. And for the whole experiment, we have 2 stages. In the first stage, subjects have 5 minutes to solve a real effort task, adding up to 2-digit numbers individually under a non-competitive piece rate payment scheme. So they receive 10 cents for each correctly solved problem. And for the online session, we scale down the payments, which is 5 cents for each correct solved problem. And then participants proceed to the second stage. In the second stage, each participant was randomly paired with another participant. 4 groups formed. There were 4 groups in each session. And each group member had 5 minutes to solve the similar task to the first stage. And in the second stage, each group member was asked to select a payment scheme before they proceed to the real effort task. If they choose a tournament payment scheme, they will receive 80 cents for each correct answer. Or for the piece rate, they receive 20 cents for each correct answer, and the payment will be divided equally for the two group members. So, and the payment for tournament is 4 times of the piece rate payment. So because we have 4 groups formed in each session, so we make sure the expected payments are the same between the 2 payment schemes. And in our paper, we use the willingness to compete scale instead of the binary willingness to compete choice. I will talk in details of the willingness to compete scale in a bit. So for the willingness to compete scale, we have 0 to 5, and each one has different probability of entering the competition. If they choose 0, then which means they choose piece rate, because the probability of entering the competition is 0. And if they choose 5, they will enter the competition for sure. And one of the 2 group members' willingness to compete will be randomly selected as the binding willingness to compete of the group. And group payment is determined by the combination of the number of correct answers and will be equally divided between the group members. So in our treatment group, so this is basically the baseline. In our treatment group, the only difference is our intervention, information intervention. And before they choose the willingness to compete scale, for the BS treatment, each participant will be told you were randomly selected to be the breadwinner or supporter of the group, of your group, and your partner in the group is the supporter or breadwinner of the group. And for the MA treatment, the difference is just the randomly assigned titles. We switch it to manager and assistant. So you can see that there are no real differences between the 2 roles in terms of power, effort, or payment. Everything is same for the 2 group members. The only difference is the framing. I mean, it's the title, the role, randomly assigned role for the 2 group members. And we told them you are randomly selected. And after they finish the major task, real effort task, we also elicit social norm. This is a very important part of our paper. We try to see whether our randomly assigned roles indeed induce different social norms for competitiveness. And the approach we use for the social norm elicitation is based on Aaron Krupker's paper. We ask them, how competitive do you think of women? Do you think a breadwinner in a household? Do you think a manager in a workplace should be? And if your answer is the same as the most frequent answer in the session, you will receive additional monetary reward. And after, sorry, you have about 3 minutes. Okay. And we also elicit performance beliefs, risk preference, and a demographic survey. So this is just a summary of treatment and a number of subjects. And I will skip this part, willingness to compete scale, which we used to elicit the responsibility when people make choices for their group instead of individual. So first, we show that like the other paper in literature, we find similarity in ability between men and women. There's no difference in performance. And we found that for both lab and online experiments in the baseline without the role assignment, the willingness to compete of women is lower than the willingness to compete of men. And in the treatment groups, we do not find gender gap in willingness to compete. So for clearance, I will just demonstrate the results from our online session actually we find robust results from our lab session. So for the treatment, when we compare to the baseline, we find women's willingness to compete increases when they are assigned as breadwinner or manager, and men's willingness to compete decreases when they are assigned as supporters or assistants. And when we compare between the roles, we find breadwinners' willingness to compete is higher than supporters' willingness to compete. And the manager's willingness to compete is higher than assistants' willingness to compete for both men and women. And when we compare willingness to compete within each role, like supporter, breadwinner, manager, and assistant, we do not find gender gap in willingness to compete. And we find the elicitation of social norms for competitiveness actually explain that the treatment effect is mainly driven by the social norms of competitiveness, because we find females are expected to be less competitive than males, and supporters are expected to be less competitive than breadwinner. But when we assign the titles to each gender, we do not find this social norm difference in social norms of competitiveness, and similar results when it comes to the manager and assistant treatment. Then we check some major factors which may explain our treatment effects: confidence, risk preference, and responsibility. We do not find differences in confidence and risk preferences for each gender in the baseline treatment, which means our treatment, the role assignment, does not change the confidence or risk preferences, and similar results to the responsibility. So we argue that the major driven of our results, the treatment effects, is meant from the social norms associated with the different roles we assign to each gender. So in our paper, we did not disclose the gender of the other group member, and the role is assigned randomly instead of like based on performance so we think that in future work, probably we can assign the role based on their performance, and we may have some different results. And also a field setup may give us more robust evidence of our treatment effects. So this is pretty much all the papers. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me emails.
Thank you, Pilu. Are there any questions from the audience here? Questions for Pilu? Yeah, you can come here soon.
Hi, Pilu. Dia here. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. You couldn't see me, but I was nodding vigorously as you spoke. So my question is, why the random assignment? Why did you choose random in terms of where men could also be supporters? And do you see any implications of your result that, you saw that men, when they were in supporter positions, weren't competing as much? How would you draw conclusions from that?
Yeah, so we just random assignment. We just want to identify our treatment effects. So we don't want to, for example, if we assign them the roles based on performance, probably the treatment effects is because of subjects with different titles may have different performance. So now we randomly assign them, and the only difference is the randomly assigned titles. So we can see the treatment effect is major from the social norms associated with the titles. And for the second part of your question, if I understand correctly, you were asking when males are assigned as supporters, when they are in the supporter positions, their willingness to compete decreases in our experiment. What is the implication? I think we can see the implication we can have is that males are actually also affected by social norms, not only women. Yes, when we assign breadwinner to women, we encourage more women to enter the competition, but we also see that males are actually also affected by their social norms when they're assigned as supporter or assistant. Their willingness to compete decreases.
Thank you. Thanks, Peilu. I think Simanti has a question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to hear that you are thinking of extending this work, especially in a field setting. And I was wondering whether in your current experiment, you know, at least definitely for the online component of it, did you ask people about how their, you know, how their lives, if you will, were impacted by COVID? Because the reason I ask this question is because during at least the first wave of the COVID, you know, everybody was locked down and, you know, at home, both parents, at least of, you know, heterosexual parents who they were at home and they had to do many tasks, which usually, you know, they had to, you know, kind of, that was something that they had to figure out. And I'm wondering, you know, how much of, you know, your findings may potentially be driven by that. It may not be. But the thing is, if you have the data or if you have the opportunity to collect data on this particular, you know, research, I would ask you to consider, you know, kind of having these kinds of questions, because, you know, who knows what happened with COVID and how that was, you know, impacting behavior in the experiment. So, yeah, but this is really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it's a very great point. I think, yeah, I see some research has find that during COVID, actually females will have more household activities in their life, career, professional life actually affected more compared to males. But for this paper, because we
Okay, well, yes. Yeah, we have to continue, but we'll keep the Zoom meeting for the end for more questions. I think Peilu is not there anymore, but she should be able to come back. So, well, thank you. We're gonna go with our second speaker, Sholi Zhao from the University of Kentucky.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm going to present a study that looks into the effect of scarcity and cognitive load on the decision-making, especially different tasks of the economic decision-making, with the emphasis on the heterogeneity of the gender differences over here. So,
excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but could you please share the screen? We cannot see the slides online, the folks who are online.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Apologize.
No worries.
Can you see the slides right now?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this work is joined by Michelle Scovia from University of Missouri, as well as Rudy Naga from the Texas A&M University, and my name is Sholi Zhao from Kentucky. So I want to motivate this question by, you know, it's basically the lot of evidence showing that the people on the scarcity tend to make decisions that even prolongs or reinforce their status of scarcity. And you know, a lot of people have started looking into the mechanism or the reasons and how the scarcity and the cognitive load are both contributors to the irrational decision making with economic decision making. So one evidence shows that, you know, a scarcity causally impairs cognitive ability. So that's why it leaves people with less capacity to make optimal economic decisions. And that started by 2000. 2013 science paper by Manny that shows two experiments, one's in lab experiments that basically induce people with a thought of a scarcity and to look at the differences between two different conditions of that thought. And a field experiment with the farmers before and after the harvest, basically to look at the differences of a cognitive load and cognitive ability, since they should be before and after the harvest to be under different scarcity and abundance conditions. Now, there's a studies later on based on this that draw opposite verdicts towards the mechanism because, people failed, for example, to replicate this significant results from the Manny's paper in different circumstances, as well as there's an AER paper in 2016. They didn't find significant differences using a national representative data set that compares the status of a cognitive load before and after the payday that's supposed to be a differences of scarcity, right? So follow up on that study, Manny actually have another paper that looks into, they failed to control the heterogeneity, they failed to control the duration of that time differences, but there's a middle ground as well. So there's the plausible mechanism suggests the scarcity increases people's susceptibility to cognitive manipulation, which in return cause people to be more prone to be manipulated, right? Under the environment in which they make decisions and especially financial and economic decisions. So overall, consider all those previous literature, we do not see a ambiguous evidence of the separated or the disentangled effects of scarcity and the cognitive load on the economic decision making, especially based on the review paper that published in 2022 from the theoretical framework of scarcity decision, the effect of the causal effect of scarcity on the economic decision making, the direction that through the mental bandwidth as well as the cognitive load, it's the only one that is remain inconclusive. So at the same time, we all know, there are gender differences as Pelu have discussed a lot in the last presentation. There are differences in the gender in terms of their consumption behavior, investment in the labor market presence. And a lot of times that assumes to be different and to be based on and caused by the differences of their preferences between genders. So, based on the, most cited economic papers on gender differences, and Paleo have also repeated that women tends to be more risk averse than men, for example, in different circumstances, the different tasks, and women are more in equality averse in, for example, a dictator game, and some other significant evidence as well. So I'm just catching up on time. I know I have prepared more slides than I'm supposed to. So what we are trying to do is actually we're trying to evaluate the effect of the cognitive load as well as scarcity versus abundance, and to see how that actually affects or interact together to affect people's economic decision making. So we conduct these online experiments with Amazon Amtech workers, and we exogenously manipulate scarcity versus abundance. That's one treatment, and another we induce different levels of cognitive load with all real incentives. And specifically under analysis, we analyze specifically by gender to look at the treatment effects, right? A treatment effects on propensity to cheat, that's the first task, and the risk preferences, time preferences, and a dictator game, I look at the generosity, which is monetary allocation. And in a spoiler alert, we found that scarcity reduces the risk-taking preferences, especially for women. And the high cognitive load significantly increase the cheating behavior only under scarcity condition, and increases the selfish behavior under both scarcity and abundance. And those are originally mostly from the male subjects. Okay, so this is our experiment design. So it's again, since we have exogenous induces two levels of inducements. One is so it's a 2x2 experiment between subject design. One inducement is between scarcity and abundance. Then one inducement is a high versus low cognitive load. And there are 4 treatment groups. And subjects randomly assigned to one of the 4 conditions receive the participation fee plus their incentives for taking the task. For each of the round, if you can look, we have 4 steps, right? In every round, the base task is designed to induce scarcity versus abundance, which I will explain in the next slide. And the Ribbons task, as you know, it measures, a temporary fluent intelligence, and we're trying to here to manipulation check to look at their status of the cognitive ability. And memorization task is a traditional task to induce different levels of cognitive load. And we randomize our economic games, which I mentioned, the 4 economic games across those 4 rounds. So this is how we design our base task. As we all know, for 4 rounds of the base task, we're trying to continuously induce that levels of the scarcity versus abundance by showing people a box which is a screenshot showing a screen, and ask people to calculate the number of dots in 6 seconds. And you may ask me, there's no way you could calculate the number of dots in 6 seconds, and that's purposely designed by us. Okay, so there is the opposite side of it. We also designed a type of study, a type of a base task that only have, for example, 2 dots or 3 dots inside of the box. So it's mostly, in that case, impossible to answer it incorrectly unless you really don't pay attention to that base task. So the reason we design the base task this way to induce scarcity versus abundance is that scarcity treatment starts with $1 endowment for their base task, and the abundance treatment starts with $8. Now, each correct answer leads to a gain of $1 for the base task, and each indirect answer leads to a loss of $1. And that's why we designed 2 types of the base tasks. One's extremely difficult for people to impossible to answer correctly unless they get really lucky. And another which extremely easy for people to answer. As long as they have the basic intelligence, it will be answered correctly within 6 seconds. So if you think about this, for base task, the people start with a scarcity treatment that starts with $1. They will be always on the edge of being between $0 and $1 or $2, right? They will be fluctuating around that $1 because they're gonna every round of the base task they answer 1 question correctly and 1 question incorrectly. And the problem is if they turns to be negative endowment for the base task, they'll be kicked out of the base task. So they are on the edge of being kicked out. Okay, and people start with $8, even if they purposely answer everything incorrect. And there are 4 rounds there, the 2 questions for each round, they're still safe. They would never be kicked out. And actually, a manipulation check shows that everybody just actually fluctuate as we suspected, as we expected them to be. And here's a memorization task. It's much easier. We just ask people to, the 2 levels. One's memorizing 8-digit number, and another lower memorization task is to memorize 1-digit number, which is really easy for them to do. And each correct answer for the memorization task leads to 50 cents real incentive monetary incentive in return. And for economic tasks, there are 4 capital tasks, as I mentioned. The first, the cheating task. In the cheating task, we ask the subject to report the first number they see from that sequence of the numbers. Now, the tricky thing is we're going to incentivize and we're going to repay them as a bonus payment based on what they answer, not based on the true first number of that sequence of orders. So if they answer, for example, in this case, 8 as the response, we will just, if this is the real incentivized task, we will just pay them $8 instead of $6, which is the true number 1 task of that sequence. And for a dictator game, of course, we randomly pair each of the subjects with another subject within our subject pool and ask this, respondent to allocate between themselves and the other subject that being randomly paired within $10. And then, of course, there's a straightforward risk elicitation task, just like Paleo did, as well as a multiple price list type of question, ask people's risk time preferences in terms of showing their patience level. And each of those, like I said, the order of those subjects are randomized. And one of the 4 tasks is that's selected at random in the end of the experiment to be real. So that will be paid based on the responses. Now, I'm going to skip a couple of manipulation check questions. This is basically showing that with scarcity. We ask people how their, mindsets of the scarcity versus abundance, and then based on 2 treatments compared with the scarcity treatment and abundance treatment. It shows basically out of 4 questions, 3 questions are significantly different in terms of their feelings of scarcity. And this is basically, the check we ask both for the Rivens matrix. We ask not only the number of correct answers, but also what they believe the answer, the questions, number of the correct answers. So both are significantly insignificant between the abundance and the scarcity treatments. And we will also check if our inducements look successful. It seems like really, as we expected, the final base task payment, which is the inducement between $1 and $8, that's significant difference between the 2 scarcity and abundance inducement, but are statistically insignificant between the cognitive load inducements. And again, this is the differences to check on the successfulness of this cognitive load inducement. We see that it's significant between the cognitive treatments, but not between the abundance to scarcity treatments. So let's jump into the result directly. Okay, so we're seeing that some right color, the two right bars indicating scarcity conditions, and two blue bar indicating the abundance conditions, and within each of those color, the darker one indicating the high cognitive treatment, the low, the lighter color indicating the low cognitive treatments. As we can see, firstly in the cheating game, we reported that basically against the general results without differentiation of gender, the general result shows that a scarcity and so basically high cognitive load induces and increases cheating behavior, especially under the scarcity condition, but not abundance condition. If you look at the comparison between the darker right versus the lighter right, versus the comparison between the darker blue and lighter blue. And actually, when we look at the separated subsample analysis, which I can reconfirm, it looks more straightforward in this table, but I did run the interactions to test the heterogeneity, which is also significant. But as you can see, those significant results are originally from the male, right? Which means, you know, the significant inducements of the high cognitive load under scarcity are being revealed and being driven by the male sample in our subjects, versus there's a statistically insignificant among female subjects. And secondly, the dictator game that shows the level of the generosity, and we are seeing basically regardless of red or blue, which is scarcity or abundance, we're seeing high cognitive load tends to decrease the generosity, which is the level of the bar that shows the amount of money allocated to the participant themselves, right? So decreasing their generosity, and which is again mostly originated for the male subjects, but not the female subjects under such inducement. And for risk preferences, we're seeing that the subjects generally exhibit increased risk aversion under scarcity and high cognitive load conditions. And this is interesting because most of those scarcity inducement to increase people's risk averse are happening among our female subjects, which means the more scarce they are feeling, they tend to be more risk averse. And there's no significant differences or significant treatment effects for the time preferences task. Okay, so to summarize the findings, the effect of cognitive load and scarcity, either joint or separate impact on the decision-making of the economic tasks vary based on the context of the economic games, and also vary by gender as a heterogeneity analysis. Especially how, as we saw from the table results, high cognitive load significantly induced cheating behavior under financial scarcity, but not abundance. And those in fact majorly originate from male subjects instead of the women subjects. And the increased cognitive load leads to lower generosity regardless of scarcity. And that's especially salient among the male subjects as well. And subjects more risk averse, and this is mostly attributed to the female subjects, and that there's no independent or complementary effects of scarcity and cognitive load for the level of patients. Okay, so basically what the takeaway is? The takeaway is basically if you look at the fourth point, or the fourth point, we kind of really, in terms of gender differences, we are in line. It reinforces the previous evidence, right? That our women tends to be more risk averse, especially even under the different types of inducement of scarcity and cognitive load. And their social preference in terms of dictator, which is the equality preferences, are more salient among male instead of female. And additionally, for the cheating game, we find that male tends to be more manipulated. Okay, so the rest of the bullet points is basically what we trying to accomplish in this experiment, and we are also thinking about running extended experiment based on how we assign subject into scarcity versus abundant treatments. And one of those motivations actually we enlightened from Bashir and Dr. Makopama's previous study, that we think about what if we instead of random assign people into abundance and scarcity treatment, we instead assign them into two type of the treatment based on their own qualifications, such as their own effort. So if you think about SNAP program that people receive based on their status of poverty versus their salary, which is their, something that they earned by their efforts, how do they spend those money under different conditions of scarcity versus abundance, under different conditions of cognitive load environment? So that would be an interesting question that we're trying to, look for next. So that's about it. I hope I can catch up some time, and I'm open for questions and suggestions for the papers and other things that we should say. Yeah, thank you. Sure, I know you can have questions. Yeah. You want?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
So
yes,
super-
please.
Super interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it's hard to impose scarcity on somebody, like scarcity that actually has bite. And I'm wondering how you could distinguish the scarcity versus just people getting like a crappier deal, right? Like people that get a good deal from the game might be happy, people that get a crappy deal might be annoyed, and they might behave differently, and it's not really scarcity.
The crappy deal, you mean like they sign into $1 versus $8? They feel like
Lottery, and they win the lottery or they lose the lottery, and then they're asked to play a game, and they may play differently based on winning or losing the lottery, and not because of like, because I mean, I think that the idea with decision making changing or scarcity is that it's a stressor, right? Not that scarcity makes you angry. I don't know if it would be a stressor or just a source of anger or annoyance.
yeah. So first of all, it's like I said, it's a between subject experiment design. So the people who are assigned in the $8 treatment doesn't know there's other counterpart that actually we assign as $1. So they do not know that fact. So by designing that game, we're actually trying to say, induce again scarcity versus abundance as objective as possible, right? If you think about previous papers that are trying to induce the scarcity, for example, the science paper that's inducing scarcity by enforcing people to think about a condition where they receive the financial shock, such as a car accident that needs repair of the cars, or they received a payment cut on their salary. And that actually, we think we actually imposed a sort of improvement, because that's really subjectively taken by each of the subjects. I could think about a financial hardship that feel great for them, not in that condition, which actually induces abundance instead. So I totally agree with you that there is a heterogeneity of people's perceptions of how they feel, whether it is angry or whether it is scarcity. But I think, yeah, I hope I answer your question by using the base test design to have it to be inducing resource scarcity purely based on what they say from those tasks. What's that?
It's a difference of $7.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, they could be kicked out with the base stack without any payment compared to treatments. Yeah, and of course, I would love to have a stake of $10 versus $70, and it's another constraint that we would have for sure compared to the hypothetical inducements. For sure.
Very interesting design.
Thank you.
I might have missed the part, but how do you measure cheating?
Oh, sure. It's reporting the first number of a string of numbers they see in the previous screen, right? So this is, for example, this five numbers say 68042, and we ask them to report the first number they see, but we incentivize those people by not the real first number, but the actual number that they reported. So they could, yeah, if you report $8, again, $8 instead of the actual $6. So that in that case, they cheated, but they received higher, and they're incentivized with a higher amount of money payback.
Yeah, of course. But, I think that you cite the feedback paper here to refer to the game. This is an improvement because in that paper they didn't do the dice, which you only know cheating by distribution. You actually know whether they cheated, and you know the size, the magnitude of the cheat.
Oh yeah.
So that's
We didn't look into the size yet. Good point. Thank you.
Thank you. If we have more questions online, thank you, Johnny.
Oh yes, please.
We're just 2 minutes behind, but well, thank you. So our next speaker is Dia from the University of Delaware.
One request from to the speakers in the room, if you get questions, it would be great if you repeated the questions for us online, because sometimes we cannot hear the questions that's being asked by the audience in the room. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So for the questions, you can repeat the question or come and ask the question in the front so they can hear. This is your presentation, right? Okay. So if you can just share it,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you.
Oops.
All right. I'm going to begin assuming everyone can hear and see my screen. So good morning, everyone. I will be talking about the role of gender identity on conservation in an agricultural land leasing context. And we look at this in a lab experiment with students. This is work with Dr. Samanti Banerjee and Dr. Chris Gustafson. So what brought me to this topic? Women are at the helm of 60% of farming operations, and a large number of women are stepping into the role of landowners. They make up 37% of total non-operating landowners, and they own about 25% of the 354 million acres that are being rented for farming, which, by the way, more than half of the US farmland is being rented out for farming. And this has implications in terms of conservation because it matters who owns the land when you are trying to implement conservation practices on farmland. So there are multiple things happening here. You have farmland that is being rented, and the tenant does not have a clear incentive to conserve because the benefits of practicing conservation is, more long-term. It benefits the landowner more than the tenant. And most of these lease agreements are verbal in nature. They are renewed annually. So there is no certainty that the lease is going to be renewed. So the tenants don't have an incentive to outright go and undertake long-run conservation, long-term conservation on the farmland. And on top of that, there are landowners, women landowners who face difficulty when they try to mandate or prescribe conservation activities on their farmland, and they face backlash from male tenants. This has been observed in sociology literature in particular, and these are driven from gender identity related losses. And this is something Pelu talked about as well. The economic literature has talked about it in detail and theorized that in a setup where there are people who are deviating from the norm, there is a tendency of incurring gender identity driven losses. And so women landowners and male tenants in that scenario, conservation would get impacted. So on top of this gender-driven dynamic that is happening on the farmland, there's also the additional issue where women feel they just don't have a seat at the table. They don't have access to information. They don't have resources available. And because they don't know enough, they feel like they are perceived as, they know less about conservation. And so their conservation demands are ignored. And female landowners would then end up demanding less conservation also because of a lack of knowledge about the best management practices. So given this backdrop, we come in and say, how can experiments help here? So first of all, as I have noted, that the leases are verbal in nature most of the time. And because of that, there is a critical role of the identity and social norms between these two, principal and the tenant, becomes very important. We cannot ignore that in an economic setup. And what experiments does here is we implement common knowledge So now there's no difference in information that is available to a male landowner and a female landowner in an experimental setup. And then we see how do they differ in terms of their lease choices and conservation effort choices. So experiments help us to bridge that gap that has been observed in the field. And secondly, because these leases are, verbal in nature, there's often this communication gap where landowners and tenants are simply not talking to each other as much. This can also be tested experimentally where we put in communication treatments and see what happens when this communication gap is bridged. So what our key experimental parameters are is this is basically a two-person sequential form game between a landowner and a tenant, and we call the landowner an owner and the tenant a renter. And the landowner has the option to implement 3 rental contracts. One is the fixed rent contract. This is the status quo, which is normally observed in the field. And then we have this added option of a penalty contract and a discount contract. This is taken from the literature of the carrot and stick incentive contracts that Fair and Schmidt have explored extensively. So we allow our landowners to choose between these 3 types of contracts. And the discount contract is actually not very far from what is also now being recommended in the field, where you allow the tenants to get some discount when they implement conservation practices. And the renter in turn can either choose strategy C, which is to conserve, and strategy DC, which is not to conserve. And we vary only the gender of the landowner, but we do not vary the gender of the renter because predominantly the renters are male. So this is a multi-round fixed matching experiment, and the players participate for 15 rounds. And in the treatments where communication is allowed, they can chat with each other for 1.5 minutes. The fixed matching is basically to ensure that there is some reputation between the landowner and the tenant. And that is generally what is observed, that even though the average length of leases are 8 to 17 years, the lease is getting renewed annually. So the uncertainty doesn't really go away. So that's why we implement fixed matching. Then we have 3 stages in the experiment. The first is the priming task. This is not incentivized, and I will talk about the treatments. Priming task is only there in the priming treatments. And the second stage is where they choose the contract and the conservation, and this is incentivized. And lastly, there is a survey where we ask them about the demographic information, their gender stereotyping tendencies, and we may also have these sexism inventory statements that we evaluate. And so basically what happens is when they are participating in the task, they are able to see not only the contract that they are choosing in the current round, they also get to see all the choices that they have made in the past and what the tenant has made and how much they have earned accumulatively. So these are our treatments. We have 2 main treatments. This is a between subject design, and one treatment arm is where priming is induced, and the other is there is no priming. Gender is revealed in both the treatments through icons, and I will show you how that is. And then we have the communication, no communication treatments, where participants are either allowed to chat with each other or not. And then we have the variance in the gender of the landowner, where we have the male landowner, female landowner across each of these treatments. For the results today, I will focus mostly on the priming treatment and how do we implement this priming. We ask participants to read a text that activates their gender identity stereotypes. So women read about the virtues of femininity and men read about the virtues of masculinity. Then they are asked to write a 5 or 10 sentences where they behaved in line with these characteristics. And we also ask them whether they relate to this priming passage or not, to see if the priming passage had the effect, what kind of an effect on them. And for communication, the identity is not revealed and subjects are asked not to be disrespectful. This entire experiment was coded, I coded this in O3 and I implemented it in online through Zoom. So this is the payoff environment that the participants face, and this is the landowner's view. So this is a female landowner, as you can see, and she will see what she is earning for the fixed rent without penalty option and a fixed rent with penalty option. She also gets to see what the renter is earning for those same options. And she also gets to see the discounting contract, where there are different types of discount values that she can offer from 10 to 100. And she can see the earnings that vary based on the discounts that she's offering. For the renter's point of view, he will just see his earnings in the top row and the landowner's earnings in the bottom row. But they have information about each other's payoffs in every single round. So one thing to note here is the fixed rent contract, which is the status quo. The renter does not have any incentive to choose the don't conserve option. So I should clarify that action D is the conserve action and action G is the don't conserve action. So basically, we did not want to bring in the context of conserve and don't conserve. So that is why we implemented these random letters of the alphabet. And then for the penalty contract, as you can see, this is the lowest possible payoff that they can earn, the tenants, 100, regardless of their choice to conserve or not conserve. And this is where we thought was a potentially gendered environment, where if there were gender identity driven losses happening, they would tend to choose the don't conserve option for a female landowner as opposed to a conserve action for a don't conserve action for a male landowner. So this is where we potentially thought there could be a difference. And then finally, this discounting contract as well, you see that they're earning 150 regardless of action D or action G. But the female landowner would earn 25 points more than the tenant. But whereas if 60 points are offered, female landowner would only earn 5 points more than the tenant. So let's talk about the results. We are actually finding that there is a significant difference in the conservation choices when male tenants face female landowners as opposed to male landowners. And this is true regardless of communication opportunities. And but however, when communication is introduced into the system, the conservation increases, but the difference persists between male and female. And then in the interest of time, I will just skip over to the choice of contracts and not talk about the time trends just yet. And we find here that women are actually offering fewer discount contracts than men. So this is something that we were not expecting because we are making their gender identity salient. So we thought they would be more likely to offer more discounts, but we are finding that there is some male treatments are just tending to cooperate more. And this is the discount distribution. As you can see, men are cooperating and offering the model discount of 60 points, whereas women are trying to just offer the 50-point discount that is offsetting the conservation cost without overcompensating the tenant, but men are just overcompensating the tenant to a place where they're earning 5 extra points and they're getting the tenant to conserve, choose the conserve option. And the discount value choices, as I said, they are also, women are not overcompensating as much as men, as we have observed. So, yeah, this is a random effects logic model, and we find that yes, the gender of the landowner is significantly, it significantly lowers the likelihood that male landowner would select C, and communication opportunities are actually improving the likelihood of conservation being chosen, and increased experience as a number of rounds increases, the likelihood of choosing C increases, and a discount contract seems to be a very important channel, which ensures the choice of C for the tenant. And when it comes to the landowner's contract choice, we ran a random effects multinomial logic model, and we find that female landowners are in fact less likely to offer discount contracts relative to fixed rent contracts. Fixed rent contracts is our base category, and increased experience with the number of rounds that it increases the likelihood of offering a discount contract relative to a fixed rent contract. And the landowner's likelihood of offering a discounted contract relative to the fixed rent contract is lower if they perceive the tenant to be an adversary. So that was something that came up repeatedly, and it was pretty strongly significant as well. And communication actually does not, in this case, significantly improve the likelihood of offering a discounted contract relative to a fixed rent one. And for the discount values as well, we find that female landowners are offering lower discounts, and the communication, in this case at least, increases the value of discount offered, and the magnitude of discounts offered does not increase if the landowner perceives the tenant to be an adversary. And the experience, the rounds are significant in this case, and the landowner will penalize the tenant if they have, with a smaller discount, if the tenant selected don't conserve in a previous round. So this is our lag choice of DC, and the landowner will offer a smaller discount if they offered a discount in the previous round. So just looking at the priming part of our treatment arm, we are finding that the gender of the landowner does significantly impact the behavior of the male tenant. The tenants are implementing conservation-friendly land uses more often when they are interacting with male landowners. However, the channel that we had conjectured is different for priming treatments, at least, where we find that women are just offering fewer discounts, and the magnitude of discount is also something that is fair instead of cooperative, as is happening with the male tenants. And communication is definitely helping both landowner and tenant to promote conservation-friendly land use practices. So the next step would definitely be to look at the non-priming treatments and how the conservation choice varies in these treatments, and if there is a difference. So with that, I will end my presentation here and welcome your questions. Yes.
I guess you mentioned that
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question for Zoom is that why did I choose positive priming, and would I get different results if I had chosen a passage that has negative priming. So instead of talking about the virtues of femininity and masculinity, I talk about the bad aspects of femininity and masculinity. That's fascinating because so the reason I talked about the virtues and of femininity and masculinity is I was trying to recreate this context of agriculture where, there are tight-knit communities and the social norms are very prevalent. When you go against the traditional norms, you are scrutinized, you face a lot of backlash. So that is why, because I was dealing with undergraduate university students, so it would not, so I thought, doing anything, I wanted to get them into this traditional mindset of what it means to be feminine and what it means to be masculine, which would mimic the social scenario that I was trying to study between a landowner and a tenant. So this priming task was done by Kunto. He's in the process of publishing his work as well. And I kind of borrowed from his literature in kind of talking about it just because I thought that it mimicked the traditional values I was trying to get my participants to think about before they participated in the task. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with this, but I'm doing a random.
Oh.
I apologize if my questions. It wasn't clear to me, were your respondents farmers in the community or were they students?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And two, how do you control for all of the other factors that influence the way that communication occurs, the nature of the contract and the social norms that we're talking about here that are driving the behavior of these individuals, all the other factors, all the other individual factors, community factors, farm type, region.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have a question from a woman landowner who has a male tenant. The question was that, was this experiment with actual landowners or was it with students? It was with students, university students. This was my dissertation, so I only had funding to work with students. And the second question is, how do you control for a host of other factors that play very important roles, such as communication you mentioned, and then farm type, and a lot of other things that factor into these interactions. And I think those are very, very important factors indeed.
Absentee landowners from the community, that sort of thing to allude to.
Yeah. And also absentee landowners from the community. And yeah, this is such a complex problem because there are so many layers of problems that are impacting the final conservation choice on the farmland. And my attempt was to look at the contract mechanism itself and whether that varies. And so what I was trying to get at is, do women offer different types of contracts than men? If that is the case, then how do we, what are the policy implications of that? How do we bridge that difference between men and women, and do these contract choices have varying outcomes for conservation, which we find that they do. So I was really looking at the mechanics of the contract and the lease choice and the conservation choice, and that is why I took it in a controlled environment where I can vary certain aspects, surely not all, but in a field, it would be very difficult to separately only parse out the gender related factors just because the dynamics between a woman landowner and male landowner is just varied. There's just so much going on there. So this was just my attempt at looking purely at gender. Yeah, sure.
I have more questions for later.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. I'm gonna track my time. So today I'm gonna be presenting this work that is in collaboration with Shuli Sao, Marco Palma, Rudy Naga, and Ron Rainey. And this is an experimental study on the role that the gender and the race of a farmer has in the support from the consumer side. So basically, lately, we've been seeing that the demographics in agriculture has been changing, and these have been changing to reflect the presence of more women, young, and beginning farmers. So according to the 2017 Census of Agriculture, there are over 1.2 million female farmers in the US and close to 1 million new and beginning farmers. This increase in the presence of women is also evident in the fact that about 56% of all farms have reporting having a woman making decisions in their main farm operations. So we see an increase in the efforts to support ag entrepreneurship from the government. They have created new programs to give more access to lands, to loans, and to assistance programs, especially to socially disadvantaged farmers. The definition of socially disadvantaged farmers by the USDA are those who are subject to any racial, ethnic, or gender prejudice because of their identity as a member of a group. We also see some programs from the government that aim to support beginning farmers. The USDA define a beginning farmer as those who has been operating a farm from less than 10 years. Now, this support is not coming only from the government, but also from some national foundations and institutions that have created programs to support marginalized groups such as females and beginning farmers. Now, although there's some programs coming from the government and this institution, the support coming from consumers have not been studied yet. Now, when we look at the experimental evidence in terms of gender and also race discrimination, we can find a lot of lab experiments and also field experiments that have been done in this area. I cited one of the most common experiments here, but what they have found is that there's substantial discrimination against female and also individuals from minorities in terms of race when it comes to hiring, also housing, like the labor market and service markets. Now, there's not a lot of studies on discrimination when it comes to the agriculture sector, especially when it comes to experimental studies. There's few discrimination studies who have shown that there exists racial and gender bias, especially when it comes to farm lending. One of the latest studies is a study by Gimir et al., who found that certain minority borrowers receive lower loan amounts with higher interest rates and also shorter maturity periods. And they make a comparison between white landowners versus Black landowners. Now, in this study, they are using secondary data from the USDA from 2004 to 2014, so it's not an experimental study. Our study is one of the first that we use an experiment to look at gender and race discrimination coming from the consumer side. What we do in our experiment, we are looking again whether the gender and the race of a farmer affect consumers' willingness to support these farmers in terms of products, product valuation, and also monetary donations and their willingness to exert effort. We conduct an online experiment with about 1,500 Amazon amateur workers. We started the experiment by introducing the Market Make It program using the description of the program and also an image of the farmer. And in this description, we exogenously manipulate the race and the gender of the farmer that's displayed in the description. And then we'll look at the treatment effects on monetary allocations, effort exertion support, and their willingness to pay for the products produced by these farmers. So again, we start the experiment by introducing the Market Make It program, which is a network or a program that supports beginning farmers in the US. When we describe the program, we manipulate or change the name of the beginning farmer to highlight a specific race. Now, underneath the description of the program, we presented a label or an image of a farmer highlighting a specific gender and race. So if you see in here, that's the image that we use for a white farmer, and we use the name Hunter to highlight the race and the gender. We use Pedro for Hispanic, Jamal for Black with these images, and we have a control that we did not use any name, and also it was just a black and white silhouette or contour. So these are the 4 images we use for the treatments having a male farmer, and these are the images and the names that we use for our female treatments. Again, we have our own control for the female treatments, displaying just the silhouette with no names. How we chose the names for this experiment, we chose the names based on the audit study by Bertrand and Mulinathan, and also the study by Gaddis et al., which are basically audit studies that have changed the name of the individuals to look at discrimination in labor markets. We pilot test our experiment and our names with about 15 graduate students, and we pre-registered this study in the AAEA RCT registry. So over here, we have a summary of our experiment. This is a between subject design, which means that each participant was allocated to one of our 8 treatments only. So they see only one of the treatments. Again, we have 2 manipulating factors. We manipulate the gender of the farmer, and we also manipulate the race of the farmer. So if you notice, we have 4 treatments for the male, treatments, 4 for female. And then in the case of the race, we are exogenous varying the races to display no race for the controls and white, black, and Hispanic. We had about 180 subjects per treatment. So after the subjects look at the manipulation, they completed 4 experimental tasks. We have a monetary support allocation task, an effort exertion support allocation task, and also a BDM auction. The order in which these 3 tasks was presented was randomized across subjects. And one of those 3 tasks was selected for payment, randomly selected for payment at the end of the experiment. So the payoff for subjects consisted of unconditional $2.5 just for completing the study, plus the extra earnings coming from one of those randomly chosen experiments. The average earnings was about $4. And then we had a post-experimental survey at the end, just collecting some demographic and behavioral information. For the monetary support allocation task, subjects were given a $2.5 endowment, and they were asked to choose how to allocate this endowment between themselves and between the Market Make It program in order to support the beginning farmer. So they could choose any amount from 0 to 2.5, and their payoff consists of the 2.5 endowment minus any amount that was transferred, if any, to the Market Make It program. The donations were made as anonymous donations at the end of the experiment, and a certificate was available to subjects at the end. Something important to mention is that while subjects were making decisions in each task, we reinforce the manipulation in each task by showing the program and the image of the farmer again. In the effort exertion support task, subjects were given the opportunity to calculate the sum of 5 randomly chosen 2-digit numbers. They had 5 minutes to complete a maximum of 10 problems. Now, since subjects were allowed to quit at any time or not start this task at all, we use the responses from this task as a measure of effort or effort exertion, right? Again, the donations made here were done anonymously at the end of the experiment. Here I have an example of the certificate that was made available to subjects at the end of the experiment. We donated about $1,100 to the Market Make It program from this study, and we received the certificate from the founders of the Market Make It program, thanking the participants from supporting this initiative to support beginning farmers. So this is what was made available to subjects at the end of the experiment. Then we have a BDM auction in which we were eliciting their willingness to pay for an 8-ounce jar of grape jelly. We asked participants what's the maximum amount they are willing to pay for 1 unit of that product. Since this is a BDM mechanism, if the bid that they submitted was higher or equal to the randomly drawn price, so the subjects will purchase 1 unit of the product at their randomly drawn price. For those who became auction buyers, and if this task was randomly chosen for payment, we mailed those products with the corresponding label to the buyers within 5 to 10 days after completing the study. So again, for those who were auction buyers, the price of the product was deducted from a $2.5 endowment. So if you notice, we kept this endowment constant across the 3 tasks. Here's just a picture of everything in terms of the logistics that we have to go through in order to make this non-hypothetical. So if you see over there, we have all the fruit coming from different farmers from different genders and races. These are the products. Over 100 products were shipped from Arkansas to Kentucky. We're surely labeled them, print the labels, and ship them all over across the US to those that became auction buyers. So yeah, a lot of logistics. Now, our sample, basically we started with about 1,539 subjects, but then we had an attention check. So when we removed those who did not pass the attention check, which was about 5% of the sample, we end up with 1,459 observations. From those, 58% of the subjects are male, with an average age of 40 years and an average annual household income of $61,000. About 71% of subjects identify themselves as white, 14% as African-American, and 5% as Hispanics. When we look at the balance check across treatments, we do not find any significant differences in all of the demographic or the observable across the treatments, which suggests that our randomization worked. Something I wanna mention today is we had a race-related manipulation check, which basically at the end of the study, we asked participants to identify or to state which was the race of the farmer that they've been looking throughout the experiment. And we had about 350 subjects who did not pass this race manipulation check, which represents almost 23% of our sample. Most of these subjects who did not pass the manipulation are coming from the Hispanic conditions. So this means that they either identify the Hispanic farmer as a Black farmer followed by a white farmer. And then we have a small proportion that did not recall the race of the farmer. Now, why I mention this is because now when I summarize the results, it's important because we find a big difference when we look at the entire sample compared to what happens when we only include those who has passed the manipulation, right? So in terms of time, I'm gonna summarize that. So when we look at the intent to treat effects, right? So I'm talking about all the sample, just looking at the random assignment of the treatments, we do not find any significant treatment effects for monetary donations and willingness to pay for the product. So basically, the race of the farmer is not affecting their these outcomes. We do find a weak significant when it comes to effort exertion. Basically, subjects are willing to exert less effort to support Hispanic male beginning farmers compared to the control. But again, when we control for variables and different estimations, that effect disappear. Now, what happened when we take into account that race manipulation check and we only include those who pass basically those who perceived the race of the farmer as the one that we intended, right, to highlight. So when that happened, we find discrimination in all our outcomes, basically through monetary donations, effort exertion, and also willingness to pay against Hispanic male and Hispanic female beginning farmers. And also we find discrimination, you can think about lower willingness to pay for those products produced by Black male beginning farmers compared to the control. So how? Oh, okay. And just if you're curious, those results come from Tobit estimations because all our outcomes are bounded from 0 to 2.5. So we ran 2 limit Tobits for all of those. But what's next? Basically, from our study, we do not have questions or information that can help us look at the mechanism behind that discrimination that we are observing. We don't know if that's a preference-based discrimination, right, or just a statistical discrimination. So that's where we're heading next, and also try to replicate this with higher stakes, right? Here we're just looking at 2.5 max, and that's what next. Yeah, thank you. Questions? Yes.
There were still features that someone might identify a particular race. I wonder why you didn't maybe like smiley face, like it's like a signature or stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? Because you can also think about why you just did not use an image at all for the control, right? So in this case, we wanted, of course, to keep everything constant across the treatments, right? So the only thing that we wanted to change were the features and the skin color. Now, I agree that you might perceive the control coming from a different race. We have the data because we also have the responses from the race manipulation check for the control. And actually about, I remember it was around 60 to 70% of the subjects perceived the farmer in the control to be a white farmer, which you can also think about, maybe that's the stereotype of a farmer here in the US. But again, we see that we are controlling for that, right? Now, we are not using the responses of the race manipulation to exclude those from the control because we see different people perceiving different races in the control. So. Yes.
Did you, I wasn't able, I didn't see it, or maybe I missed it. Did you, when you were looking for the discrimination, did you look at compare the race of the respondent to the race that they saw and how that affected their choices as opposed to just overall having to donate it to different races?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the question is whether we look at the race of the consumer as well, right? And how that affects their responses here. So actually, I don't have those results here, but we did a second stage, more like an exploratory analysis to look at the race and the gender of the consumer, right? In terms of race, what we find is that we find a significant effect against Hispanic female farmers, and that's coming mainly from white male consumers. That was the main effect when we look at the race and the gender of the consumer. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
have a meeting at 11:45.
Okay.
Still want to send the last paper.
Um,
I gotta go. I have a meeting with ERS.
sorry, Rooney.
I can.
Do you wanna,
I can do
just-
5-minute summary.
um,
I'm the last minute replacement because my co-author is from Macedonia, North Macedonia, and she couldn't come, unfortunately. But if you want, I can just summarize. But this is really a fascinating, interesting paper. So, okay, this is about women empowerment, and we got this project from UN Women. They funded this project, and we focused on ag households, basically, in North Macedonia. What's interesting about North Macedonia is a very patriarchal society. And
Are there
this is-
some slides to share for the virtual
can you
folks?
share it, Michelle?
Thank you.
yeah. You can keep.
Okay, so the properties are still predominantly registered under the name of a male, husband, if you will, or a partner or brother, which I find really interesting, right? And so men are dominant in the households, and so I think this is an interesting case to study in relation to women empowerment. So we conducted a survey to measure basically the women empowerment in these ag households. And then we conducted a field experiment, a lab field experiment. And so I'm just going to show you those things. This is how the empowerment is measured. This is a validated measure for women empowerment. You can Google that sometime, okay? But I want to mention that in terms of the women empowerment, you know, the higher this number, the better. And it's only 0.64 for women, and I don't know what that number is. Anyway, so there's women disempowerment in this particular sample, which is expected, right? So in this modified dictator allocation game, I think we have about 462 or so households that we used. So these are not students, okay? These are in the field. Subjects were shown 7 choices each individually, the husband and the wife, and then jointly they had to do another 7 choices. Okay, I want to show you this one. Michelle, can we move this? Minimize.
There.
Okay, so these are the options that we've given the partners, basically, the husband and the wives, consistently. And each of them were separated to each room at first. So the woman played these 7 choices by themselves. And then the males played the same choices by themselves. And then after that, they were brought in together to do a joint decision. Okay, so overall, each of them played basically, all of them played, there were like 21 choices basically overall in our data. Okay. Any questions there? And so we gave them practice session. This is just to show you what that is. And then we basically randomly chosen the binding decision out of that 21 choices. Okay, and they were informed of these binding choice at the end. Okay. This is interesting. So if the couple wants to maximize payoff of their household, they should all choose B, the option B. Okay. And so that's why I put B here. Okay? Now, if they want to maximize their own payoff, okay, they would choose AAA here, right? And then B here. Okay. If they want to maximize their own option, basically. If they're irrational, for row number 4, it's irrational if they chose option A instead of option B. Okay. And then inequality aversion is either AAA or AAA, AAA. Okay. I'm not going to discuss this. We don't have time, and it's not that significant in our results. So these are some of the major results. For those who maximize own payoff,
take a look at when the females were doing their decisions by themselves, about 51 of these females basically maximized their payoff by themselves when they were by themselves. But when they were jointly making the decision with their husband, right, or their partner, that moved to 0. Now that is significant, right? That is just fascinating to me. For those who maximize couples payoff, not much difference, right? Whether they did it individually or jointly. But even here, when they maximize others payoff, right? This one here, and then this one increased significantly here too, when they jointly made the decision. So it just shows you how powerful these findings are. This is also an interesting thing. We did a probit regression on this is the marginal effect of an increase in the money that we allocate to the woman in option B, okay, on the probability of choosing an inefficient allocation. And here we define inefficient allocation as the probability of choosing the A option compared to the B option, okay? And then we separated the results depending on the women empowerment. So this one would be very low women empowerment. This is very high women empowerment. Okay? But take a look at this one. When the female has very low women empowerment, basically, the probability of making the probability of choosing option A, which is a inefficient allocation, if you will, is this one for when the females were just making their own decision, right? But for joint decision, it's changed significantly, which is a powerful indication as well of women empowerment, disempowerment, basically. And so compare these results with this one, when women are much more empowered, which is a drastic, different result. Just to summarize, I think we think men are more selfish when the woman is disempowered or the partner is disempowered, and male partners of highly empowered women are more likely to allocate more money to the woman and the household. And this is just an implication of it. Okay, this is not directly from our finding, but it's an implication that if you give disempowered women more money in this particular context anyway, in North Macedonia, it would necessarily not help the household, which implies that women empowerment is really important, right? At least in ag households. Sorry for the quick presentation. Any questions? I think we could replicate this in other settings as well.
Yeah, with the third bullet point, that was fascinating. With the third bullet point, you give disempowered women the money, isn't that the equivalent of giving them the money privately, where the woman will often take the money?
Yeah, privately.
So that it seems like, you know, if the woman is disempowered and you want to help her, that giving her money privately as opposed to giving it to the household would result in more.
That's a good point. Only if the partner doesn't know about it.
Yeah.
But if the partner will know about it, yeah, he wouldn't know. But that's a good point. Right? Just, if you take a look at this one here. Yeah, this one here, basically. This one is,
you know, you look at the female decision and they're all pretty similar across the different
Right.
types of empowerments. The
Right.
male ones that change a lot.
right,
The male ones. don't.
yes. Yeah. I gotta go. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, yeah, that-